Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 439, Factorio and Space Age on Nintendo Switch 2. Posted by Twinson. Hello, it has been a while since we've talked. About a third of you have subscribed since I last did one of these, so I think I should just basically explain what I usually do, which is essentially a complete read-through, and as I go through I'll be speculating about things. There isn't a lot to speculate about in this one, but this is more sort of getting back into the swing, I guess. I used to do these every week, and the analysis I would do was very much in depth. A lot of YouTubers and Twitch streamers, they go for a very high level, summarise it quick as you can type approach. I do the opposite. I just blather on for ages, so there could be all sorts of stuff in here you're not expecting, but that's kind of the format of these. If they do start doing them again, like properly, regularly, I will start covering them again. The schedule I ended up with was that the videos would usually come out on a Saturday or Sunday, depending on sort of how big and how complex they were. So look out for those as if we get more Friday Facts as we go along. I say it sounds like they will be doing them, but it'll perhaps be a few months before they kind of kick in. Switch 2 and Factorio by Twinson. I saw there was a good level of interest in Factorio and Factorio Space Age for the new Nintendo Switch 2. Some players were asking about it even before the console itself was officially announced. We know that you will scroll to the conclusion, so here's the announcement first. Factorio Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. So it starts off with the image. I think this is just from the Nintendo Switch edition. I think this is like the promo, what do you call it, capsule art that they use on there. One of the things I always really love about these, they always do them, they're always like the spaghetti factory and, sort of messy and everything's cramped together because, they want to show all of the different art assets and all that sort of stuff, in a small compact image. But they're always a little bit, I don't know, trolly is probably a bit exaggerating it, but they've always got bits in them that like either don't make sense or are just really, a bad thing a bad thing, not how you would typically sort of play the game. So here, for example, just know it's got the purple inserter on it, which is the filter inserter, which is now obviously gone in version 2. But you've got a belt here that's got copper cable on it. Don't belt copper cable. That's even though I'm very much an advocate of play the way you want to. Belting copper cable is usually it's got kind of inefficient because it's a ratios thing, but it's got iron ore on it, uranium ore, and copper cable on it. Why has it got those things on it? And then you've got a belt down here where you've got an underground. It's interesting this actually because I think this is like blending together because this underground appears to be going in both directions. So I think that's maybe an art thing. But, it's an underground going there, but it's then also going in that direction. So is it coming in or going out? If it's coming in, what exactly is it feeding? Because it's not providing coal for this boiler, I say there are some things like here, I don't know what's going on here. This is like squished up art, but it's clearly just been sort of put together, to show things off. Oh, well, yes, you've got a underground here that's pointing in that direction, and yet the belt's going down there. So they always put in like odd things or weird things or things that don't make sense, or they're just not what you would do, sort of thing. So yeah, but it's always just meant to kind of show a mad, spaghetti factory basically. Similar to other games, we decided to release a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, an upgrade you can get if you own the game for the original Switch. If you don't have the game, you can get it as part of a bundle, which is the game with the Switch 2 edition upgrade. Nintendo has some more clarification about Switch 2 editions here. So I don't own a Switch 2. I'm not a fan of paying the Nintendo tax, but also the types of games that, the whole console exclusive, make you buy the console thing only works if you're interested in the games, and I'm not generally interested in like platformers and the types of games that Nintendo do. I'm not not criticising them, they're just not my cup of tea. So although I have a Steam Deck, which I don't really play, but I have a Steam Deck, but Switch 2, not really of that much interest to me. But obviously it's sold enough on Switch, I guess, to kind of justify this. It was popular enough. And what they're basically saying there is that there's like an upgraded version of Factorio that will work on Switch 2. So if you already own the Switch version of Factorio, as they explain later on, it's an upgrade basically. So it if you've got it, then it ports across with this, upgraded version for Switch 2. But if you buy it, if you buy it on Switch 2, then you will get this upgraded edition. It doesn't cost you any extra sort of thing. So if you go out and buy it for Switch 2, you'll get the upgrade for free, essentially. The upgraded version will feature better resolution. The game will run on the screen's native 1080p resolution instead of 720. When docked, it supports all resolutions, including 2160p, which is 4K. Variable refresh rate support for the console screen, some higher quality animations, some higher quality resolution sprites, other visual improvements, faster loading times, the ability to build much bigger bases, mouse mode support. Using the Joy-Con mouse sensor, the left and right Joy-Con can be used as a mouse. Now, a lot of those are effectively, those are the upgrades that we all got, So, I think the VR was just, it was there already, but Switch 1 didn't have it and Switch 2 does, so, they're just natively supporting it. And, we got, they did improve the animations and, the sprites and things like that. Those were all part of the upgrade. I suppose the most interesting bit here is the whole mouse mode support. That was kind of one of the, what would you call it, flagship features for Switch 2 was this mouse mode. There's a little video of them showing them they're using it in a minute, so I'll kind of explain it. But one of the things I noted, people sort of poo-pooed, my comments when I did it, but Switch 2 has this mouse mode where you can use the Joy-Con, which is just the hand controller, on its side and a sensor on it that lets it operate as a mouse. And people were like, well, why have they added that? That seems a bit pointless. I think most of that commentary came from people who are console gamers, and so something like a strategy game or like Factorio or something like that, where having a mouse is a very useful tool for those sorts of games. And obviously the Steam Deck has the trackpads, which are kind of much more similar to a mouse, basically. So that was kind of one of the things I sort of assumed. And games like Civ and this and real-time strategy games, those sorts of games where a mouse is a good interaction system compared to a controller, it seems like that was what they were they're almost trying to broaden out the appeal of the console. And, whether there was ever really a market for that is obviously questionable, but Factorio is going to support this on its side Joy-Con mouse type version. The price for this upgrade will be free. We don't believe paying for a technical upgrade is reasonable. For players who want to support us and want more content, they can get the Space Age expansion. Obviously that means that it's not, if you go out and you want it on Switch 2, and you've not got Switch, you've not bought it on Switch, when you buy it, you're buying it, it's not completely free. It's that the version that is the Switch 2 version, that's a free upgrade if you've already got the base game sort of thing. So if you buy Factorio on either of the Switch platforms, you get the appropriate version. If you're buying it on Switch 1, you get the Switch 1 version. Buying it on Switch 2, you get the Switch 2 version. I said I go into a lot of detail on these, and that's not really needed. I'm sure you can read and you understand that, but it's I need to get back into the swing a bit of doing these, I must say. Factorio Space Age. We are happy to announce that Factorio Space Age will be coming soon to the Switch 2 as a DLC priced at $35. It will feature the same content as the PC version. Nothing was removed or trimmed down, which is very interesting from a technical point of view. They do go on to explain that there are some little tweaks basically, but in terms of content, so as in all of the planets, all of the features that they added, all of the new buildings, etc., all of those are going to be in the Space Age expansion for the Switch 2 version. So as I'm reading that, it won't be available for the Switch 1 version. It'll only be the Switch 2 version that has the DLC, and that makes a lot of sense. I could well see the Switch, which was pretty outdated hardware when it was released, and now therefore must be, basically ancient essentially. That supporting Factorio Space Age, I don't think was ever really likely. It's just too much, particularly the way it does the maps, all of the various planets. Each of those maps are stored in RAM, and obviously you can swap things in and out of RAM, but it's a very limited piece of kit. So having all of that in memory or swapping it into memory is probably beyond what the Switch can really do, because it's like storing a massive bitmap or something in your RAM at all times. It's one of the things that limits why the map is effectively infinite, is because your PC would melt down before, because you would run out of RAM before you could actually have the entire map in your memory, basically. So, maybe in I was going to say a million years, in 100 years or something, when, RAM is just, so plentiful, or operating in the cloud, then you could reveal the entire map. But nowadays it's not feasible. So it all makes sense that wouldn't be available on the Switch 1. The fact that it can be made available on Switch 2 is interesting. One of the things it is going to go on, I mean, it does talk about here about much larger bases, so that's to do with some of the optimization I think they've done as well as the improved capability. But I think part of it as well is all of this new stuff is like built around giving you more productivity out of smaller factories. It was one of the things I kept saying when we were doing the Friday Facts, was that they're adding all this stuff in, all these extra planets, all these extra systems, all this extra stuff. If we have to build a massive base on every single planet, it's going to get really tedious. And so all the buildings they've given us have these massive prod bonuses. They're more module slots in them, bigger so they can have more beacons. And all of that, as well as quality, is geared around small footprint, huge output, And you've seen, I'm sure, these videos of foundries and EMPs just thumping out entire stacked green belts of stuff, no problem, out of a single machine sort of thing. So the fact that they can do that is effectively almost shrinking the individual maps. You don't need to reveal a massive area and build a massive factory and go off and get, loads and loads of ore patches to get reasonable sort of productivity. Now, if you want a mega base, then yeah, you still need to do some of that stuff. But they go on to kind of say, and they sort of say here that I don't think it's really going to support mega basing, but then I don't think it did on the Switch, and I'm not sure it can on the Steam Deck. So yeah, it's horses for courses, isn't it? The ability to play it on the move and all that sort of stuff is what you're trading for building a 2,000-hour mega base, For full details on the Space Age expansion, check out the Space Age content page. If you've not seen that before, it's just like this was when they did the wrap-up for the Factorio Friday Facts before. They ended off with doing this. It's almost like a press release type of thing, saying what's on all the planets, like a sales pitch for, new music and all the enemies and all that sort of stuff. Release date. Both the Factorio Nintendo Switch 2 edition and the Space Age DLC for Switch 2 will release at the same time. The release date is as soon as possible. Like with the release for the original Nintendo Switch, the certification and store setup can take a long time. I don't want to delay the release by setting a conservative release date, but I also don't want to promise a release date that we might miss. What I mean by that, certification is the process by which they basically check the code of your game, the executable usually actually, and like what you put on the store and all that sort of stuff. Now, people think it's like a quality check. I mean, it is quality checking, but they think it's like quality checking in the sense of, and Nintendo used to do more of this. They're a bit lax now, really, but there used to be a thing that, Nintendo specifically, they would put seals of quality onto the games, and they were like almost like this is a Nintendo approved game, on the game cartridge. And that was actually a reaction to, well, like the video game Crash that basically, if you've ever seen any of these videos on the E.T. Game, that was all at about the same time, basically. And it's interesting that, how history repeats itself, but the video games became a big thing and like a big money spinner. And a lot of companies pumped out slop, basically. So just trash, just rubbish games. No, they're just awful stuff. And just pumped it out and pumped it out and pumped it out. And people got to the point where they were like, I'm just not interested, this is just, it's all slop. I'm not interested in it, I'm not going to do video games anymore. And so the industry basically crashed. There was massive contraction. Lots of people lost their jobs, companies went out of business, all this sort of stuff. And the E.T. game was an example of that, because it was a tie-in to a huge movie, and basically it wasn't well received, it wasn't very good, it had bugs in it, and essentially that sort of became emblematic of that, and Atari ended up burying thousands of the cartridges in a landfill. And Nintendo's seal of quality was like a counter to that, a sort of a, this game is okay because we've checked it out and we say it's okay, like reviewing it. Nowadays, cert is more about a technical thing. It's sort of like checking that a game that you're putting up on their store isn't full of, like, they're not really a thing now, people are finally come up with them, but it's not full of crypto mining or NFTs and all this sort of stuff that people would use maliciously, or things like that. It's not got spyware in it, or all that sort of stuff is what they really check with cert nowadays. Whether it's a quality game in the sense that you and I might think of quality is not what they check. But that process does take a long time. It's essentially automated testing. There will be some manual testing. And in particular, I think with Nintendo, they do check the store assets. So what you put up on the store, that you're not putting up misleading images of, blood and gore or something like that. And it's a storefront that kids can look at, So that's the type of thing they check. And that does take a while. And it sounds like it's probably quite very long indeed for Nintendo, and not particularly, shall we say, clear how long it'll take. So, you put it in, and one game it might take a week, another game it might take 3 months type of thing. So, and there's no consistency. There's no, well, that's AAA, so it's quicker. So it sounds like that might be one of the issues. And of course, if they find something, find a little bug that causes the game to crash, and you need to fix that, and then you need to resubmit it for certification. What they're basically saying, to cut an incredibly long, I said I blathered on, didn't I? To cut an incredibly long story short, and as they kind of say in a minute, it's basically done. They just need to get it through that cert. And because it could take a week, it could take a month, they don't want to set a date and say, right, well, let's be conservative. Worst it could possibly take is 3 months, so we'll set a date of, January the 12th or something. But then if it got done in a week, they'd be locked to that January the 12th date. So instead, they're saying it'll be done when it's done, meaning once it's gone through cert, then they'll set it up for release, if you see what I mean. So basically they're saying it's done when it's done, but that's more to do with Nintendo and that process rather than, the Wooby themselves type of thing. We are aiming for a December release so you can get a nice gift before Christmas. Not an official release date, just something we are aiming for. So yeah, clearly trying to get it out so that people can buy it or request it as a gift for Christmas, which makes a lot of sense. The journey to Switch 2. Ever since rumours about the console appeared, I was interested in working on it. It would be a shame not to take advantage of the new features and processing power. I asked for access to the development environment shortly after the announcement, but didn't receive a positive answer. I was hoping we can get access at the console's release. We did get access shortly after, in July, so I got to work. So, if you've not ever encountered this, what they have with every console, because a console is a fixed, locked-in ecosystem. It's not quite so true nowadays that, consoles are basically just PCs in a box, let's be frank. Particularly, early generation consoles. They're a black box in a sense. They're a lump of silicon and plastic and what have you. And, it's not like a PC where you can dive into the operating system and fiddle about with stuff. They're not quite as open. And that's one of their advantages, that it's a lockdown ecosystem. But what that means is that to allow devs to do things like optimization and to understand why bugs are happening and things like that, you need to have more tools. If you've ever seen Unreal or Unity, they run in an IDE, a development environment, and it's got all of the tools sort of around the side, and you'll be able to play the game in a little window. And effectively, you therefore need that equivalent for a console. Now, I say it's not quite like that, because nowadays, you can export Unity games as a console game and all this sort of stuff. But basically, the idea is you've got this version of the console that is a developer version, and that then is something that developers can buy. I think, or they might get them sent actually, but something that they can get access to that gives them all those extra tools in order to develop the game and, say, optimize it and, make sure there aren't any bugs that are due to the fact that the hardware's working in a particular way, whereas, on a PC it might work differently. So, there are sort of translation issues basically. So that's what they're talking about with that. Sounds like they requested that as soon as the console was announced, and then didn't get it until basically the actual thing was released and live. Part of that will have been Nintendo locking down for leaks. Whenever you see like a launch game for a console, or particularly around the sort of first few months, if you think about it, a game maybe takes 3, 5, 10 years to develop. Well, it's a bit extreme. That's a GTA type game, isn't it? But it can take a long time to develop a game. And so if you're going to have games available for your launch, those development kits need to be available for developers a long way in advance. But then you've got a bit of kit in the world that, although it doesn't look like, they always look different. They'll have extra ports on them and stuff like that. But you have something in the world that is basically what you're intending to sell. And of course, those companies sign NDAs and all that sort of stuff. But NDA being a non-disclosure agreement. But that therefore means that the opportunity for leaking is rife, basically, because although people have signed an NDA, that doesn't stop information coming out. And a lot of the time when you see these leaks about the next console generation, it can be because there's an SDK or an experimental version or a development version that has actually been sent out to some of these developers, and it's a bit of a quid pro quo, basically, of sort of like, we'll send you these versions, don't leak it, but it's because we want you to develop a game that will either be a launch title or come out in the first few months, and therefore you're getting exclusive access to the pool of people who will buy that console. In exchange, you can have this development kit to help you build it, but it means there is that risk of leaking. See, if you haven't seen any of these before, this is the type of stuff I do. I just blather on. Hopefully some of it's interesting, but usually it's normally about, obviously, the game itself, but there isn't a lot on that in this. The first step was to make everything compile and run on the new platform. After setting up everything, this was surprisingly easy, as most of the things are compatible between the platforms. I even used the same version of SDL2, with a few fixes and modifications. So what that means, the between bit is between Switch 1 and Switch 2. So basically, whatever the architecture is of Switch 2 is pretty much identical to Switch 1. It's just it's faster and more powerful and what have you, which is interesting, but also makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because that's how you make upgrading easier. If someone would have to completely rewrite the game in order to get it to work on the new version of the platform, then it might stop people releasing those games. Especially something like going from a Switch to a Switch 2, you want to be able to say to everyone, buy a Switch 2 because all of your Switch 1 games work. You're buying a new version of the console which is more powerful, everything you've already got works better. So therefore, you've already got a library, or it might not be giant, but you've got a library of games you can already play without having to buy a new game. So that's a selling point Nintendo was obviously keen on, and that's why a lot of it just translates over. There's not a lot of changing. SDL2, this is one of those things. I don't know if you've ever seen that meme of it's like almost like a house of cards where you've got one little support pillar and I don't usually put memes on there. I don't really like that sort of stuff. But it's like everything is like depending on, it's stacked on top of. They've built all of the infrastructure of the internet on just this one little, program. And SDL2 is a bit like that. It's like an open source, the simple direct media layer is basically a way of translating between all of the different operating systems. So you can basically write your game once, and then this SDL library allows you to go between DirectX and Linux stuff and blah, 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 which is how an operating system, what it's operating is your hardware. So it's literally, when I move this mouse around, that is that's a hardware input onto a physical bit of thing that then needs to be translated into, like a GUI, a visual representation, but it also has to have meaning in terms of the stuff. So, if I'm doing something with hardware, like if I open a web page, it's got to know to load that web page, and it does that by going out via hardware to my ISP, my internet box basically, and says to it, download this data. Well, all of that is involving the hardware to software interaction basically, and your operating system is what's doing that. So it's saying, oh, he wants to load this web page, tell the Ethernet basically to download that web page. So what this SDL does is it acts as like a controlling layer between all of those things. So it allows you just to, you do it once and tell the SDL library, and then it works out essentially, do I do it via DirectX? Do I do it via OpenGL or what have you? So it is the sort of pinning layer, which is why I say that meme where you've got like everything just sort of sits on top of this one thing. Because it's one of those open source bits of software that is just used everywhere, essentially. The original Nintendo Switch did not have enough RAM and CPU power to run Space Age. 5 planets worth of bases was just too much. So the next important question was if the Switch 2 can run it. Some quick tests showed that yes, everything was good enough, and you can finish Space Age while maintaining 60 UPS and 60 FPS if you build reasonably. And that's the point I was making earlier, that I don't think it's going to support megabasing, but a reasonably sized base, reasonable sorts of numbers for science per minute, it can run that. Mouse mode is an interesting feature, but it has to be integrated right. The ability to use a mouse doesn't mean you can now play the same way as on a PC, since you are, well, missing a keyboard. You will still play as you would normally with a controller, but mouse mode will allow you to use a cursor when needed, placing buildings, navigating the UI, etc. The feature needs to be enabled in the Controls Settings menu. Trying to automatically switch to mouse mode based on controller orientation and when the sensor detects something was unreliable. I found the mouse cursor would activate randomly if I held my hand and fingers in some positions. There's also an option to swap the R and A or L and A buttons. That would be between, right-handed, so the right Joy-Con and the left Joy-Con. This makes clicking with the Joy-Con feel natural. Okay, so there's a little video of just, I assume Twinsen, using the Switch 2 and building some heat pipes on Aquilo and switching to mouse mode. There's no sound on it. It seems to work quite well, doesn't it? I think there's a bit, don't they do a blueprint or something? Yeah, because you have this menu, that pop-up there. So this pop-up that it shows here, this is actually part of the interface that you can have for game pads, basically, and it's what you use on Steam Deck as well. So this isn't, I mean, they might have tweaked it, I guess, but this isn't something they've sort of added for Switch 2. I mean, it was put in, I think, for Switch 1 and Steam Deck, so it's sort of the same thing. But this menu is how you get to some of the controls that you would do if you have, if you have a keyboard, you've got all sorts of shortcuts that you're using. And of course, this is a way of quickly getting to it. I believe you can enable it on like normal desktop as well. I think you can switch it on. Because I did very briefly try Factorio on Steam Deck, so I might be getting the two mixed up. But I think if you plug a controller in, you can get access to it'll sort of know and use this menu. But yes, basically this isn't new as such, but being able to use the controller as a mouse in order to interact with it is new. And notice you twiddling about with the thumbstick there as well. So yeah, I think there's a bit with a, yeah, here we go, copy and paste it then. Cool. So yeah, it works quite well. Quite how good it would be, how nice it would be to, and I've just got it on loop. Quite how good and nice it would be to use for 8 hours or something, I don't know. I have heard from people that the Joy-Con is a bit uncomfortable for long periods because it's so thin. You're sort of holding something that's very, very thin, so that's quite a squeeze. You imagine, holding like that for hours, and if you're on an 8-hour flight or something, you maybe wanting to play Factorio on your Switch 2 for the entire duration. That's quite a uncomfortable way to hold things. But one of the advantages I think it does have that I saw around release time is it works on anything, which is presumably why it was triggering, from the fingers being in the wrong place. But basically it means you can put the thing on your leg or on your t-shirt or something, and it works as a mouse then, so you don't have to have a hard surface in order to use it, basically. Because people are using it on the on the couch arm sort of thing, basically. So yeah, I think that's one of the advantages. But yeah, as I say, apparently if you play for an enormous extended period of time, like some of us do, but probably shouldn't do for Factorio, then it's apparently a bit uncomfortable. One of the things I don't know, if anyone's got one, is if you can just plug a mouse in and it recognises it. Some consoles get very weird about that sort of stuff because, you can imagine on some first-person shooter where mouse and keyboard is like, just a bit of an upgrade, as it were, a bit of an advantage. If you were allowed to just plug them in and just use them on any game, then you'd get an instant advantage because it's the aiming that's I can do that incredibly quickly and accurately compared to using a controller. Although obviously people do get very good at using controllers. Then I went to work putting everything together, figuring out how to distribute the upgrade and the DLC, and fixing many smaller issues. Everything was falling into place, but quite late I decided to test the performance on 4K 2160p TVs, and unfortunately performance was terrible across the entire game. It looked like we wouldn't be able to support 2160p resolution. Luckily, Genhis suggested disabling light occlusion. This improved performance across the board, but Volcanus, Gleba and Space was still problematic. I integrated Tracy Profiler, which helped me find the problematic code and shaders. Profilers are just, when I'm talking about optimizing before, and looking for bugs and things like that. When you're optimizing, one of the key things is to know where you're having performance problems. If you've ever used the debug menus and you switch on the whole time to render and all that sort of stuff, that's how you can work out, my inserters are the problem. Belts are the problem. That sort of thing. This is one of the reasons, Factorio is basically like programming but a video game, because a lot of things you do, optimize this is like optimizing a Factorio save is like optimizing a game, basically, in a way. The profiler is basically saying, well, it's spending, 1 millisecond doing this, but 10 milliseconds doing that. So you would look to the 10 millisecond operation to see that's, if I want to optimize, that's the thing I want to make quicker. Because one of the things is when you're optimizing is knowing where the bottlenecks, the slow bits are, because there's little point in you optimizing something if it doesn't actually have any benefit on the game. It's like the thing of people just, I've talked about this on several Friday Facts, so people will just go, make it multi-threading and therefore it'll be better, because they don't really understand how multi-threading works. And the fact that particularly on like Factorio, where it's deterministic, B always follows A type of thing, or A leads to B and A always leads to B. That's what being deterministic is. But they don't understand that if something takes this long, it doesn't matter if you take a whole load of other things and do them in parallel. If they've got to wait for that one operation to complete, you're not really saving any time. And so that's the same with optimization. If you optimize the thing that is only taking 1 millisecond and you've got something else taking 10 milliseconds, what have you saved? You've saved half a millisecond where you really need to save time in that 10 milliseconds. So that's why you have a profiler. It tells you how much time something is taking, basically. Well, I mean, it probably tells you all sorts of stuff, but how much RAM you're using, blah, 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 how many cores to memory, all this type of stuff. So it lets you optimize whatever's wrong, as it were. Or not wrong, but bad. Or not bad. Could be better. Again, it's improved the fog and Space Dust shader performance significantly without making them look much different. And that's a perfect example of an optimization that you improve it and it doesn't really look that much different. Maybe it is a little bit worse if you really look at it, but it looks basically the same, but now takes a lot fewer CPU cycles or what have you, less memory in order to work, and therefore it works as an improvement. This optimization, and maybe more, will be available on PC too. So players with modest video cards will see better frame rates and will be better able to play in 4K. Some graphical features, like light occlusion and animated water, will be disabled when connecting the console to a 4K TV, but now it keeps 60 FPS in most scenes, including busy bases. The game is now ready from my side, but it still has to go through certification, where new issues are likely to be found. And that's what I was basically saying. So it sounds like it's ready, playable, done basically, but it's got to go through cert. Cert will probably find bugs. They'll have to fix those, and then go back through cert basically. So that's the delay. Space Age Anniversary by Clonan. Happy 1 year anniversary since the release of Space Age. It feels just like a few weeks ago we were deep in the heart of the launch preparations. The excitement of those final weeks and days before release are fondly remembered. There's a common phenomenon where even if something is absolutely brutal, after an amount of time, it's just this thing of time heals all wounds, where basically, even if it's absolutely brutal and you're sort of, working incredibly hard and feeling, put upon and can't possibly meet these deadlines and all that sort of stuff, like a year later, 3 years later, 5 years later, all you remember the good bits, So it becomes a fond memory, even though it was absolutely brutal at the time, I'm saying it was for, that bad for them, but so there is a bit of it's like, the nostalgia, it's the games games from my youth were better than they are now. No, they weren't. It's just that you are looking at it through the haze of nostalgia, basically. The reaction to Space Age has been incredible, and we're so thankful to report that we recently crossed the 1 million sales mark, and over 50,000 engineers have claimed their stars in the Galaxy of Fame. So here it is then, Galaxy of Fame. I always thought that they should maybe try and put like structure to it, because these are all these are all people's save files that they've uploaded. If I zoom far enough in, I think it. Oh no, you have to view it in a certain way, don't you? Because these are all people's save files. One of mine's in here. I always thought they should maybe try and force it to do, and it basically just randomly picks a point basically. And they should maybe try and force it to do like a spiral galaxy shape or something like that. It is sort of forming a kind of structure, and there are like dark bits, which I assume are due to whatever algorithm they're using, whatever noise function, to spread them around. You're getting these like gaps, almost like like a real galaxy has dust clouds, where you get these dark bits, and there is a bit of a flavour for that, isn't there? And it seems to be, maybe it's just my vision, but seems to be sort of orienting around an axis there, rather than a cross or something like that. But yeah, so it would be quite cool, I think, for it to be a spiral galaxy or something like that. It's interesting that I was going to say only, but it's 50,000 engineers, so 50,000 people out of 1 million have. I guess that's uploaded to Galaxy Hall of Fame, isn't it? So I was going to say that represented the number of people who'd finished it, but it's more those who've seen the end screen and agreed to upload their save to the Galaxy Hall of Fame. So I'm sure there's plenty of people who don't bother, in the same way that even when you see games with no game has like 100% completion rate, and the instinct is to chalk that to people who haven't actually played it. They've never launched the game, but in reality, it could be people who are playing off Steam, or simply didn't enable that information to go back to Steam. So 5% seems quite low, but I suppose there's also, a year is quite a while, but I play this game a lot, and not wanting to blow my own trumpet, I'm okay at it. So me finishing it a couple of times, and I have only finished it a couple of times, I'm just, because I'm thinking, because obviously the game now is effectively double the size, so having to play through what might be a couple of 100 hours is actually a fairly big ask if people have got a lot of other, other commitments and what have you. So yeah, although that might sound quite small, it is only the people that agreed, decided to upload their files, and it's only a year, which for some people might not be enough to have got to that point anyway. Interesting. The initial wave of bug squashing and intense fixing lasted until the Christmas vacations. Once we were back, we decided to take a more relaxed approach, slowly working through the issues on the forum and not putting too much pressure on ourselves, which I am glad about. I know they did do, it was quite a intense bit. They were fixing a lot of bugs, but that first period, those bugs are more likely to be the game breaking bugs. Basically, this completely balks the save, and I mean one of them was like, was that fixed before? But it was like the thing where if you landed on certain seeds on Fulgora, because you could soft lock yourself basically, because some of them, the starting island would be a complete ring, the cliffs, as it were, the walls would go all the way around you, and all you would have is the one vault, the one where you land, and it didn't have like iron sticks in it, I think, or something, and therefore you couldn't build, but you were basically soft locked. Of course, you could get a platform to get, bring you stuff, but you couldn't, bootstrap Fulgora you weren't guaranteed to be able to bootstrap Fulgora. So stuff like that is what they would have focused on fixing, and things like, these belts don't replace right when I do a drag or what have you. That was lower priority, I would guess, and they've been fixing those after the Christmas break, but at a much more steady pace, I think. Over the summer, we had a few team get-togethers here in Prague, where we had long discussions about Factorio, Space Age, and games in general, brainstorming ideas, thinking about our long-term plans, as well as laying some groundwork for what our next project could look like. Been great to be in a fly on the wall for those sessions. Now, after our summer brain jams, we're starting work properly on 2.1. We don't want to promise too much, as always, and we're trying to keep the scope not too big and not too small. We really want to make sure Factorio will be in a good place for long-term support, and 2.1 might be the last chance for us to make some bigger, breaking changes. In short, it's going to be quite a while. I can promise it won't be ready this year, and I don't promise that we won't start writing juicy and entertaining Friday Facts when we have something more to show. As always, let us know what you think at the usual places. Right, so lots to unpack in that one. Basically, I've been speculating on some of my streams. A 2.1 was always coming, because eventually you get to a point where you've decided you've basically fixed all the bugs that you want to, or you've fixed enough that you just up version it. You just take it to the next version. You say, right, we're done. We're not going to fix anymore, or only if it's a game breaker. 2.1. Okay, that was always going to happen. Whether they would do a 2.1 like people refer to 2.1, where it's adding new features and proper new stuff to the game, I'd started to doubt, because they'd been very quiet, which is it's fine. They don't have to talk. But they've been, kind of quiet and not really said anything. There were a couple of hints on the forums, one of which was that they're not massively enamoured of the whole space casino thing with the LDS shuffle. So if you're not aware, you can basically cheat, in quotes, a whole bunch of legendary resources by using recycling of low density structures, because low density structures, when you make them in a foundry, you can put in liquids basically, and so I think you only need to add plastic. So if you add, so instead of the steel and the copper wires rather, no, copper plate, you put in liquid metal basically, so liquid iron and liquid copper, and so all you have to put in is plastic. And that therefore means you can put in legendary plastic, and since it ignores quality on fluids, it will spit out legendary low density structures. You could then recycle those to get legendary steel and legendary copper, essentially. So although you're not necessarily gaining the resources, you need to put in the copper and the iron, although because of how liquids are done these liquid metals are done in the game, they're virtually free. Well, and on Volcanus they are literally free. That meant that you can basically recycle low density structures and get steel and copper, and of course steel you can then using, I mean, steel's like massively important in loads of stuff, and copper's, pretty good as well. So all you'd be sort of missing in quotes was like legendary iron plate. The other thing was that, and what I mean by space casinos is that because of the whole, where you do the meteorite, crushing, you get bits of meteorite back, and the percentages like improve, and you get like the enhanced version as you do more researches. So what you could basically set up is a processing machine that would use the fact that you get so much of the meteorite chunks back in order to sort of take in meteorites and just pump out legendary stuff at the end, essentially. It would be like meteorites, but of course you then convert it into legendary iron, legendary copper, what have you. So essentially you would be entirely, I mean, the only thing you would be missing would be stone, because you can't, for some reason, get stone on platforms. So, because you can make coal, and there's a whole, it's a complicated process. It's not simple, but basically you would shortcut meteorites into legendary materials. I mean, not shortcut. It's not quick and easy, but that would be a very efficient way of getting legendary materials. And I believe those two are things they're not the intended outcome of those systems. And so they have mentioned on the forums that they are looking to, shall we say, nerf them. I don't know what it would actually mean, but when they talk about bigger breaking changes, I'm pretty sure that at the very least is what they're talking about. Which is to say, it's a big change because it completely changes systems in the game. It's breaking because if you've set up LDS Shuffle and Space Casino, those will no longer work. So your save file that uses them will not work going forward. So that's the type of stuff they're talking about. I mean, I guess it depends on exactly how they were thinking of doing those. I'm just because they're referencing the scope, not too big and not too small. To me, although those could be complicated to program, I think there are relatively simple fixes for those things that don't sound like they would be massively complicated to do. But of course, it depends on what they think of, how they think they want to solve it, as to how big the scope of solving that is. What I'm basically saying is that to me, that sounds like they're going to put some new stuff in the game, meaning new systems, new weapons, those types of things. The stuff they put on the drawing, that they had on the original plan, or perhaps were in the game in earlier versions, that were things they wanted to put in, but never actually did. Now, I happen to know, for those that don't know, I went to the LAN party where they tested, where all your favourite YouTubers plus me went to Prague and basically played the game early as a big LAN party. And they mentioned quite a few things at that were, oh, we'll do it in 2.1. I'm not going to say what any of them are or were, not least because it was a year ago and I've completely forgotten. But I do remember them saying, oh, we'll leave that for 2.1, was a bit of a mantra for some stuff. So I do know that they had things that they wanted to put in, or planned to put in, or, had in but had to take out. That sounds like they have decided, yes, we will try to put that in. Okay, so what I'm basically saying is that I think there are, from what they're saying here, some significant additions that will come in for 2.1. It won't just be break Space Casinos, break LDS Shuffle. Okay, obviously I'm guessing at that. I don't know. But yeah, it sounds like we might get some things coming in. Clonan's double negative at the end here. I don't promise that we won't start writing juicy and entertaining Friday Facts. Sounds to me like, I think it's going to be months. We might get a trickle of Friday Facts like we did. So when they did the initial reveal of Gribbly Writer, in fact, let's show him. Yes, so to show you what I mean, this guy, I mean, this could be one of the things they add. We know about him. We know he was dropped for, or it was dropped for the expansion. Maybe the interest has been sufficient that they've, revived him. I don't think so, but could be. But yes, so the point I was getting at was that 367 was on beginning of February, and the next one was literally the Steam Deck one, so not related to expansion. And then there was the Ukraine sort of special post, the whole NFT jokey one. That was in April. So they went from beginning of February in 2022. Oh my God, it was so long ago. 2022, and they didn't really start talking about. You've got the Switch ones, ironically. I didn't really start talking about the Space Age stuff for a good long while, and that's what I think will happen with 2.1 basically. So we might get a Christmas special like we did with. In fact, was there a Christmas special? I don't remember. Isn't this where we had? Yeah. So here you go, 2022 recap. So across 2022, from February to the end of 2022, you basically had, what was that, 6 Friday Facts, 7 Friday Facts, something like that. And then they went all the way to August before actually really starting on the Space Age Friday Facts. So I don't think it'll be that scale. I don't think we'll be waiting at, whatever that would be in 16 months or whatever for news about 2.1. But I think maybe it's next year, maybe it's Easter they start teasing us on stuff. I mentioned that as well because I literally finished a script for what I want in 2.1 on Wednesday, just before I'm actually on holiday, not meant to be doing this. I finished a script for what I want in 2.1. There was actually like loads of it, and there's like a list at the bottom of things, so I could do several of those. If people are interested in seeing that, I'd love to know what you want in 2.1. That'd be very interesting to see, and I could maybe do some videos exploring that. But yeah, so basically I have been working on a what I want in 2.1 video. I'm slightly pleased that this means that I've got a bit more time for it, because it was looking like I wouldn't be able to work on it really, or actually record it and stuff until Christmas. But if that means, if this blog and this tease at the bottom here means that we're not getting any new Friday Facts until like next year or something, then that's really convenient for me, if I'm totally honest, so I've been doing the speculation videos. For anyone who's new and doesn't know, they're a lot of work to do. These Friday Facts ones are quite intensive, but it's just me talking at the camera. There's just relatively minor editing. It takes a while, as I say, but it's not as complicated as those other ones. So if they start doing Friday Facts again, I will start covering them. I will do like I've done here, where it is just me blathering on. And if that's of interest to you, then do subscribe. But I will also be continuing the speculation videos, the law speculation videos, until it reaches a point where it's unsustainable. I was going to do a jokey thing on the thing. I'm like 101 subscribers away from even monetizing the channel properly. I do have memberships enabled, but in terms of the ad revenue, all of that sort of stuff, I'm not even at that stage on Factorio. And that's with you. Like a third of my subscribers have come since I started doing the law speculation. So a lot of you are new, and that's amazing. But I don't do this as a job. A lot of the YouTubers you see, will do it as, if not a full-time job, then part-time job, or it's part of their income stream. I'm not even able to to monetize things properly. So I do this very much in my spare time as a hobby. I massively enjoy doing it. The biggest perk I ever got, and the biggest justification for it, was the whole invite to the LAN party in Prague. So no regrets. That's not a moan or a beg for you to become a member or anything. But the point is, I can only spend so much time when I'm not working doing this stuff. So if they start doing Friday Facts, law and speculation will have to just take a back seat until 2.1 is out. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts and might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about the Friday Facts or Space Age, you can find me live streaming Factorio every weekend on Twitch and YouTube. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Ever since rumours about the